Okay, pollination I have explained in the previous class, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, students, switch on your videos. Let's start today's class. So in the previous class, we saw how there are different parts of the male and the female reproductive systems. We also saw how there is, like, after the formation of gametes is done, then the gametes have to physically meet in order to fuse, right? And that is done by the process of pollination. So when we talk about pollination, it is a process in which after the male gamete is formed, so it gets released from the pollen and gets transferred to the stigma so that they can fuse. This process of transferring is called as pollination. Now, why is the transfer of pollen grains important? Like I told you, it is important because when the pollen grains will be transferred, then only it can reach the female gamete in order to fertilize it. And when the fertilization will happen, then only the zygote will be formed, which will lead to the formation of the new individual. So that is why the transfer of pollen grain is very, very important. Now, depending upon the source of the pollen, like from where the particular pollen grain is coming, so the pollination is of two types, self-pollination and cross-pollination. So, self-pollination is when the pollen grain is transferred from, you can say, the one plant. The plant is same in that situation. So, they are transferred from the anther to the stigma of the same flower. So, it can basically you can say be transferred in one flower, or it can be transferred from one flower to another flower in a same plant. So here basically the pollen grains, they get, like, the plant is same, the flower can change or it could be in the same flower. So this type of a pollination is called as self-pollination. On the other hand, when we talk about the cross-pollination, so this is the kind wherein the pollen grains are transferred from one plant, anther of one plant, to the stigma of another plant. So this is called as cross-pollination. So now, obviously, for the process of pollination to take place, there are certain agents of pollination that will come into play. The agents of pollination are called as pollinators. Now see, what will happen is that as soon as the pollen grain lands on the stigma, okay, the stigma will recognize whether it is the right type of pollen or the wrong type of pollen. And then the pollen germination will happen. Okay, so basically when the pollination is finally completed, the pollen grains have landed on the stigma, then the pollen tube germination takes place, wherein the pollen tube growth happens, or the pollen grain grows a tube-like structure called as a pollen tube germination. So after the pollen grain lands on the stigma of the right type, then a phenomena called as pollen tube germination takes place. Basically, what happens during this phenomena? In the case of pollen tube germination from the pollen grain, for example, this is a pollen grain. When pollen tube germination takes place, it grows a tube-like structure like this. This is called as pollen tube. Now the question comes along, why is it there and why is it grown? So the male gamete, so that they can be transferred up until the egg cell of the female. So this is called as pollen tube germination, wherein the pollen grains, they give rise to a tube-like structure which enables it to transfer the male gametes to the egg cell. Understood, students?
Yes, ma'am.
Then comes the pollinators. Now, pollinators, these are the agents that will cause the pollination to happen. Meaning, it will, like, for example, I'm saying that the pollen grains, they have to be transferred from the anther to the stigma. So this transferring process, it's done by some sort of agent. And that agent of pollination is called as pollinator. So now the pollinator, they are of two types. Either they are living pollinators or they are non-living pollinators. So non-living pollinators are called as abiotic pollinators, such as wind, such as water. On the other hand, the biotic pollinators are the living organisms that act like a pollinator, like insects, particularly honeybees, and then various animals. Clear, students?
Yes,
Hmm. So now after the pollination is successful, now the pollen grain has landed onto the stigma. Now the next step is fertilization. But before that, you people note down till here and note down a little quickly so that we can start the next topic, that is fertilization.
Done.
Done, both of you?
Done. No, ma'am.
Done, students? Both of you are done? All right.
Done, ma'am. Done. Done, ma'am. Done. Done, ma'am.
All right. Any doubts, students? Any doubts up until now?
No.
All right. So now moving forward, talking about the next topic, that is fertilizing. So like I told you that when the male gamete and the female gamete, now they have been transferred. Now the male gamete will meet with the fusion, like for the fusion with the female gamete. So that fusion is called as fertilization. So the fusion of the haploid male gamete with the haploid female gamete in order to form a zygote which is diploid that has two sets of chromosomes, right? So n plus n gives 2n, and then this zygote, after the zygote is formed, then the zygote is going to turn into an embryo, like after several divisions, which will turn into the future plant. So after the fertilization, the zygote undergoes several divisions to make the embryo, then which further becomes the future plant. Now remember that the ovary, remember the ovary which was the part of the female reproductive system of the flower? That ovary, it actually starts to mature after the fertilization and it becomes the fruit of the plant. So a ripened ovary is called as the fruit. On the other hand, the ovules, they turn into the seed. So the seed is the fertilized ovule. So after the fertilization is done, all the other whorls of the plant, such as the sepals, the stamen, stigma, the style, these things are going to fall off as they are not needed by the plant anymore because now the sexual cycle is at its completion. So basically, this is what happens. Ultimately, when does this whole entire process stops? When the seed is formed. What is the importance of seed? So seed is the product of sexual reproduction. It's very, very important. Right, it is important in the case of flowering plant because it is a product which is formed specifically in a flowering plant which gets covered by a fruit. Now, what are the importance of seed? So, it has various importances such as in the field of agriculture or farming. When you sow the seed, then only you're going to get the plant. Then it becomes a food source for us. It basically, you can say, contributes to the diversity of the plant, right? It brings more variation. It brings a lot of various, like different kinds of plants. And lastly, since it is a product of sexual reproduction, it causes genetic variation, meaning the introduction of new characters in terms of the genetic level. That is also done by the seed. So, up until now, any doubts, students?
No, ma'am.
All right. Now, furthermore, when we talk about the types of seeds, depending upon whether it's single cotyledon present or two cotyledons present, the seed is of two types, monocot and dicot. Now, monocot are those seeds that have a single cotyledon present in them, whereas dicots are the seeds that have two cotyledons present. Clear, students?
Yes.
Now note it down. Then we'll talk about the structure of the seed.
Then then
Alright, now see, like I told you that the seed, it basically they are of two types depending upon the cotyledons, right? The number of cotyledons. For example, if you think about the kidney beans, so you can split those kidney beans into two parts. That shows you that there are two cotyledons in it. But if I give you a rice seed and I ask you to split it into two parts, you'll not be able to do so. So that is the case of the monocot seed. So dicot seeds are the ones that have two cotyledons present in them. And then the monocot seeds are the ones that have just a single cotyledon present. And this right here is the structure of a seed wherein you see this is the cotyledon number 1 and this is the cotyledon number 2. Then there is like the part above the embryonal axis, meaning this is the right in the middle is the embryonic axis. So above part is plumule, which will give rise to the shoot. And then the below part is the radicle, which will give rise to the future root. So every seed has a tough protective covering, which is called as the seed coat. Inside the seed, there are two regions. First is the plumule, which will give rise to the stem or the shoot of the future plant. And the radicle is the second part, which will give rise to the seed. I mean the root of the future plant. Clear, students?
Yes.
Okay, note down.
Done.